Namaskar. A warm welcome to World News and Indian Perspective on All India Radio. This is VC Pramod and with me is Aditi Lumba bringing glimpses of major developments of the day from across the globe. Over the next half an hour, we shall bring you the latest from the world of politics, economy, sports, entertainment and more. As the world fights the COVID-19 pandemic, we begin the program with a message of caution to stay safe and protected by following these three simple steps. Wear a face mask. Maintain social distancing, focus on hand and face hygiene. The headlines. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi to address World Economic Forum's Davos dialogue virtually on Thursday. Nepal, Bangladesh and Myanmar launch COVID-19 vaccination drive with India-made vaccines. IMF projects 11.5% growth rate for India in 2021. India and US National Security Advisors hold telephonic conversation. Agree to work closely to further advance India-US relations. US asks its citizens to reconsider travelling to Pakistan due to COVID-19, terrorism and violence. And Cricket Australia confirms members of Indian cricket team were subjected to racial abuse. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi will address the World Economic Forum's Davos dialogue tomorrow on Thursday through video conferencing. More than 400 top industry leaders from across the globe will attend the session. He will be speaking on the fourth industrial revolution, using technology for the good of humanity. Mr. Modi will also interact with the CEOs during the event. In a tweet, Mr. Modi said he is looking forward to speaking on a wide range of subjects relating to India's reform trajectory, increased usage of technology and other issues. Davos Dialogue's agenda marks the launch of the World Economic Forum's Great Reset initiative in the post-COVID world. Nepal launched its first coronavirus vaccinations with the 1 million doses of vaccine provided by India under its Vaccine Maitri initiatives. Addressing the inauguration ceremony of the inoculation drive in Kathmandu, Nepal's caretaker Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli expressed gratitude to India for providing 1 million dosages of Covishield vaccine within a week of its rollout in India. He thanked Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi for providing vaccine doses to Nepal. The COVID-19 vaccination drive in Bangladesh was launched in Dhaka today. Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina launched the program through video conferencing from her official residence. Our Dhaka correspondent has filed this report.
The COVID-19 vaccination program in Bangladesh was inaugurated today by Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina in Dhaka. The first shot of the Oxford AstraZeneca developed vaccine produced by the Serum Institute of India was administered to nurse Runu Veronica Costa of the Kurmitola General Hospital in Dhaka. 4 more people, including 2 doctors, a traffic police and an army brigadier, received the vaccine at the hospital. 20 to 25 frontline health workers will also receive the vaccine today. The people who received vaccines on Wednesday will be observed for a week before the nationwide vaccination program is rolled out on February 7th. Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina thanked India for providing the consignment of vaccines, including the first consignment of 20 lakh doses as gift. Sheikh Hasina expressed the hope that the vaccination program will mark the victory over the pandemic in Bangladesh. Health and Family Welfare Minister Zahid Malik said that more than 42,000 people have been put on duty to run the nationwide COVID-19 vaccination program. He pointed out that Bangladesh has been successful in keeping the corona infection rate and death rate among the lowest in the world. Earlier on Tuesday, Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina told the Parliament that in the first phase of the vaccination distribution, 1.5 crore people will get 2 doses of the vaccine each. She said Bangladesh will get 6.80 crore vaccines from the WHO COVAX facility. Rajesh Jha for AIR News, Dhaka.
Myanmar launched its COVID-19 vaccination program as well. The healthcare staff and volunteer medical workers were the first to receive shots of the India-made Covishield vaccine. Ton Mint, a health ministry official at Yangon General Hospital, said it would create a situation to reduce the rate of infection and a relief for healthcare workers. Myanmar received 1.5 million doses of COVID-19 vaccine as a gift from India last week under the Vaccine Maitri initiative. Government of India has stated that it will continue to supply COVID-19 vaccines to partner countries over the coming weeks and months in a phased manner. Many countries have evinced interest in accessing vaccines from India, which is the global hub for vaccine production. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has already stated that India's vaccine production and delivery capacity would be used for the benefit of humanity in fighting this crisis. India-Sri Lanka bilateral relations will witness a momentous occasion on Thursday as the first consignment of 5 lakh doses of Covishield vaccines manufactured by the Serum Institute of India reach Colombo. This gift of vaccine to Sri Lanka is a part of India's Vaccine Maitri initiative, under which India has gifted vaccines to 7 other countries in the region. The humanitarian gesture amid the pandemic is a reflection of India's commitment to its neighbourhood first policy and SAGO doctrine, in which Sri Lanka has a prominent position. The delivery of COVID-19 vaccines to Sri Lanka is a fulfillment of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's commitment made to his Sri Lankan counterpart Mahinda Rajapaksa during the virtual bilateral summit held in September last year. Sri Lanka approved emergency use of the vaccine on 23rd January this year. Meanwhile, Indian Council of Medical Research has said that COVID-19 vaccine Covaxin has equivalent immunogenicity against the UK variant and circulating strains of SARS-CoV-2 in India. Covaxin has been developed by Bharat Biotech in collaboration with ICMR. UK variant of SARS-CoV-2 with its all signature mutations were isolated and cultured in the world successfully for the first time at ICMR NIV, which was used for testing.
Health and Family Welfare Minister of India, Dr. Harshvardhan, said that engagement with multiple stakeholders is important to spread the right information and dispel rumors about the vaccination program. He said 2020 was the year of discovery for COVID-19 vaccines, and this year's challenge before the world is to inoculate the people who need it the most. While chairing the 148th session of WHO Executive Board yesterday, Dr. Harshvardhan said it is encouraging that tremendous progress has been made despite all the problems in the world. He said ever since the COVID-19 was declared a pandemic, a valiant fight was fought against the disease with collective efforts to suppress transmission, prevent illness and reduce deaths. Appreciating the role of all the member states for acting with speed and scale during the rapidly evolving pandemic, Dr. Harshvardhan said determination and hard work demonstrated by the countries have saved countless lives amid the ongoing crisis. He added that the biggest success of this pandemic has been the teamwork, and healthcare organizations actually focused on delivering a meaningful goal across the world. Dr. Harshvardhan also paid respect to those brave men and women who sacrificed themselves in the pandemic and those who are continuing to fight relentlessly and selflessly against the COVID-19. The Executive Board welcomed the Immunization Agenda 2030 and unanimously recognized the central role played by immunization programs in safeguarding public health globally. Member states also called for early and equitable availability of COVID-19 vaccines through the COVAX facility. Global coronavirus cases surpassed the 100 million mark today as countries around the world struggle with new virus variants and vaccine shortfalls. Almost 1.3% of the world's population has now been infected with COVID-19 and more than 2.1 million people have died. One person gets infected every 7.7 seconds on an average since the start of the year. Around 6.68 lakh cases have been reported each day over the same period, and the global fatality rate stands at 2.15%. It took the world 11 months to record the first 50 million cases of the pandemic, compared to just 3 months for cases to double to 100 million. Around 56 countries have begun vaccinating people for the coronavirus, administering at least 64 million doses. Israel leads the world on per capita vaccinations, inoculating 29% of its population with at least one dose. With over 25 million cases, the United States has 25% of all reported COVID cases, although it accounts for just 4% of the world's population. The United States leads the world in the daily average number of new deaths reported, accounting for 1 every 5 deaths reported worldwide each day. As the worst affected region in the world, Europe is currently reporting 1 million new infections about every 4 days and has reported nearly 30 million cases since the pandemic began. Britain reached the 1 lakh deaths on Tuesday.
The World Health Organization Special Envoy on COVID-19, David Nabarro, said people should expect to see more coronavirus mutations, but at present there is no evidence to suggest vaccinations will become ineffective. Talking to a TV channel, that scientists were now looking in more detail at a UK variant following reports that it could be more virulent. China on 27 January announced stringent measures for entry and return to capital Beijing during the 40 days long Spring Festival travel rush period, also known as Chunyun, starting on 28 January until 8th March. China has decided to strictly control the transit of international passengers from third countries to enter Beijing on direct international commercial passenger flights. For passengers who plan to take direct flights to Beijing, the relevant embassies and consulates abroad will check the residence history and will not issue the health statement for boarding to passengers in transit from a third country. More from our Beijing correspondent.
A super cautious government has taken strict measures to restrict the flow of people in Beijing city, looking at the special needs of maintaining the security of the capital ahead of Spring Festival. As per the report, airlines should remind and dissuade the third country personnel to transit into Beijing and do not allow the transit personnel to check in or board the plane. All passengers are required to fill in the letter of commitment for taking a flight to Beijing before boarding and will bear the relevant legal responsibility for concealing information such as residence history and health status. Beijing local government also said that starting tomorrow, personnel from high-risk areas in the country are not allowed to enter the city. Urgent cases may be allowed with special permission and nucleic acid test negative report within 72 hours. Those from low-risk areas in China also must hold the nucleic acid test negative report within 7 days before arriving in Beijing and carry out health monitoring for 14 days after arrival. International travelers entering China at other domestic ports can enter Beijing only after 21 days and follow additional health monitoring after entering Beijing. Meanwhile, WHO team of experts is expected to start their field visits from tomorrow after completing their quarantine. Anshman Mishra for World News, All India Radio, Beijing.
U.S. President Joe Biden said that U.S. aims to acquire additional 200 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines. These include 100 million doses each of the vaccines made by Pfizer Inc. and BioNTech and Moderna Inc., increasing the overall total doses to 600 million with delivery expected by summer. The previous purchase target was 400 million doses. Biden hopes that it will be enough to inoculate most Americans by summertime. Biden said that he would like the amount of the vaccine going to local governments to 10 million doses per week for the next 3 weeks, up from 8.6 million currently.
We expect these additional 200 million doses to be delivered this summer, and that increases the total vaccine order in the United States by 50%. From 400 million order to 600 million.
Each vaccine requires 2 doses per person to be fully effective, suggesting the new purchases would build up enough of stockpile to inoculate most of the country's 331 million people. The vaccines are not approved for use by most children. Updating its travel advisory for 3 South Asian countries, the U.S. has urged its citizens to reconsider their travel to Pakistan and Bangladesh and not to visit Afghanistan. The State Department issued separate travel advisories for the 3 countries. It has asked U.S. citizens to reconsider travel to Pakistan due to COVID-19, terrorism and sectarian violence. It also asks citizens not to travel to Balochistan and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa provinces due to terrorism and kidnapping. Urging its citizens to reconsider travel to Bangladesh due to COVID-19, the State Department asked them to exercise increased caution in the country due to crime, terrorism and kidnapping. In another advisory, the State Department asked Americans not to travel to Afghanistan due to COVID-19, crime, terrorism, civil unrest, kidnapping and armed conflict.
India and the U.S. National Security Advisors held a telephonic conversation today. Ministry of External Affairs said that NSA of India, Ajit Doval, conveyed his best wishes to NSA Sullivan on his appointment as National Security Advisor. Mr. Doval underscored that as leading democracies with an abiding faith in an open and inclusive world order, India and the U.S. were uniquely positioned to work closely on regional and international issues, including combating the scourge of terrorism, maritime security, cyber security, and peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific region and beyond. NSA Sullivan stated that the U.S. was looking forward to working together on the bilateral agenda and the common global challenges. This is All India Radio giving you the world news.
All India Radio presents World News. News and views from across the globe. What happened and what is up next? The newsmakers and the highlights of the day. From 10:30 to 11 p.m. every night. on 100.1 FM, All India Radio.
International Monetary Fund IMF has projected an 11.5% growth rate for India in 2021. It makes India only major economy of the world to register double-digit growth this year amidst the coronavirus pandemic. With the latest projections, India regains the tag of the fastest developing economies of the world. Revising its figures, the IMF said that in 2020, the Indian economy is estimated to have contracted by 8%. In its latest World Economic Outlook update, China is next with 8.1% growth in 2021, followed by Spain 5.9% and France 5.5%. India's economy, the IMF said, is projected to grow by 6.8% in 2022 and that of China by 5.6%. In our hotspot segment, we bring you today a discussion with senior economic analyst Shubhamoy Bhattacharya on the prospects of 11.5 growth rate for India.
Today we will have our discussion on the revision of the 2021 forecast as far as India's economy is concerned by the International Monetary Fund, the IMF. They revised the forecast from 6.8% for the 2021 to 11.5% growth. We'll try and understand as to why and how IMF has revised this forecast by almost 5%. So Shubhamoy, do tell us for the benefit of our listeners as to how is it that IMF has revised these figures at this stage?
Well, Arjun, what's happening is essentially the effect of the pandemic is lessening in some countries. The scope of revival of economic activity is becoming clear. So essentially what's happening is that the data that's getting available with all the agencies is coming up for further and further revision. One might be surprised, after all data is continuous, and then why is it that from one analysis to the next, and in the span of a few months, why are these data getting changed so rapidly? Well, the reason for that is that this is an unusual year. There have been periods when there's been absolutely no data flow. And now there have been indicators coming in from different parts of the economy in India, abroad, and those data are helping revise the International Monetary Fund estimates. And they are startling revisions, but that's exactly what one could be surprised. But one is not totally flabbergasted because the global shutdown and the revival from that have been so dramatic that these sort of corrections, and in India's case, a very welcome correction, is now getting penned in.
So specifically, the growth forecast that has been revised is for the financial year 2021 to 2022, and that is expected to be 11.5% as 6.8% that was estimated or predicted earlier. This was announced by IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva, and her statement is to the effect that decisive action and decisive steps were taken to combat with the COVID-19 pandemic in India, bearing in mind the demographics and how the population is clustered, how difficult it can be for any administration to contain the spread of this virus. So they have actually, in this economic forecast, given credit to the government of India as to how they've handled and managed the pandemic and the after effects of it, which has economic consequences.
One major thing that India has been able to achieve is that we have seen that when COVID has been controlled, and after that, when mobility has got again resumed, COVID has come back to hurt several economies. It is to the credit, and the India government and the state governments must be able to take credit that due to a combination of a lot of circumstances, contact tracing, effect planning, and so on and so forth, the rise of mobility that we are seeing across the economy has not been accompanied by a consequent rise in level of infection. Of course, the nature of the beast is such that you can never say that this is permanent or something. But definitely, there is surely a heartening reason to feel from the numbers that are coming for the last few months that the infection rate in across almost every major state in India has tapered off. And as people have come out to resume their economic activities, and this is especially important because in India, we are largely a service sector economy. About 54%, 55% of our economy's GDP is largely services sector. Now, services, in most cases, excepting in sectors like IT and others, requires people to be in close proximity. Yet, despite that proximity rising up, the level of infection has not come back to haunt. And obviously, the government would have the reason to feel that it has been able to flatten the curve, and which is why the IMF feels that the level of rebound in the economy will be almost at full scale, which is why the revision from this year's contraction of -8% to next year's 11.5% positive, it will be a journey of that scale.
So we have to factor in the low base effect as well, where the contraction is of -8% for this financial year and before the next financial year actually starts, where the IMF forecast is for 11.5%. Apart from this, the IMF has also spoken about policy support. So despite the lockdowns and the restrictions which have been imposed or even lifted, the policy has continued, and the government has not only provided stimulus to key sectors of the economy, but also ensured that policy reforms have not stalled. They have continued towards infrastructure development, healthcare, dispensation of a vaccine. How do you see India actually competing with China, which is the only nation which has a positive GDP of about 2.6%? Are we in a position right now to compete with China, bearing in mind how the IMF has forecast?
That's a major point, that to what extent India is able to sort of, revive its growth potential. As you would know, that from the period 2014 onwards, 14, 15, 16, India had the honor of being the fastest growing economy, and that had slowed down, and this revival is therefore all the more creditable. Essentially, it shows two things. One, that the reforms, as you rightly pointed out, will come in very handy, but I would also say that the reforms that have been started earlier obviously have started sort of getting factored into the economy. And these are the reforms, especially in the field of capital allocation, on insolvency and bankruptcy, the reforms in digitalization of the economy. These reforms are essentially those which have started earlier, and they have now added pace at which the economy opens up. And of course, the reforms that have now been announced since June onwards will also have a sort of, add to them, making it a virtuous cycle which India had been lacking for quite some time. So the key point is that the reforms give a wonderful strength to the economy to expand, to take advantage of all the possibilities that are coming up, and to therefore keep on growing at a healthy pace for quite some years, which is necessary for the economy to really become a competitor in Asia and then globally.
How do you see land and building space can be let out on rent that can also stabilize rentals across the country, especially commercial rentals, as a source of income for the government? How do you see wages improve for the average person in the employment sector, and how do you see this in correlation to company profitability?
At this stage, companies which are overly obsessed with profit would, I suspect, be doing themselves a disservice, because this is a space which comes very rarely in any country's history, where there's an enormous scope for capacity expansion, and companies which are keen to plow the money, reinvested earnings back into investment would be well recognized by the share markets. And by doing that, automatically, the companies create more room for employment. Obviously, what happens is in the high-end manufacturing, you don't get much of employment. But what happens is when big companies start spending on stuff, then they create a circular economy of demand for other, right down to the very small units, where the employment strength actually resides. So essentially, now the trick is to ensure that companies start investing.
Well, Shubhamoy, another factor linking both employment and tax collection is FDI investment into the economy. The December figures for FDI have actually fallen by almost 50%. But if you compare it to the global FDI inflow, India has done certainly very well. How do you see the FDI collections picking up and that investment being converted into factory output, into employment, into tax collections, and more importantly, the shifting of manufacturing from China to countries like India?
FDI flows do not follow a monthly pattern. So their flows, unlike the tax flows, which have a monthly steadiness to them, FDI flows can be quite erratic. So I wouldn't read much into the December dip, because these can change just with one deal and so on. But what has happened is there's a lot of companies which are finding reasons to expand their production capacity in India. In terms of global possibilities, they are still very limited, which means that the possibilities are intense.
So basically, brownfield projects are more likely to succeed than greenfield projects, and we've already effectively spoken about financing of infrastructure projects that will come out from the coffers of government, but private sector lending toward these kind of projects and brownfield projects. Do you think maybe that will be announced in the union budget?
Right from 2018, we have actually made it very clear that we are much more keen towards brownfield investment. Greenfield investment, for many reasons in India, takes time to take off because of, initial delays, land clearances, and so on and so forth. So yes, one can't be surprised that the private sector typically and FDI typically wants to move on into brownfield investment. But of course, it raises the question as to what happens to fresh manufacturing capacity expansion. Well, that is where the budget will have, I'm sure, some things to say, because there are lots of sectors where the government, as the primary builder, can create projects which may be difficult for the private sector to start off and do. So once the government creates and brings the project to completion, then the private sector can take over from there for the running of the project, which is the brownfield project, and execute and run them properly. There are plenty of examples of those. The airport privatization is a good example of those. We can have lots more. The ports themselves, for instance, are waiting for, and there's a great opportunity there for monetization of the port properties. There are so many others. This is something where a large amount of FDI basically gets attracted.
So fiscal prudence is just as important as the union budget will look to ensure that expenditures don't exceed revenues and they're within the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act. Thank you so much, Shubhamoy, for being with us on this program.
Thank you.
Moving on to sports, Cricket Australia has confirmed that members of the Indian cricket team were subjected to racial abuse. Cricket Australia's integrity chief, Sean Carroll, has said that it is not acceptable in this age.
Now let's look at the major developments around the world as reported in the foreign press. According to the New York Times, China's COVID-19 vaccines are reported to have inconsistent data and spotty disclosures. Wall Street Journal has reported that the Pentagon sent a B-52 bomber across the Persian Gulf region in a show of deterrence to Iran. The Guardian has reported that Germany is expected to tighten border controls to prevent spread of new coronavirus variant. The Himalayan Times writes that corona vaccine from India is a lifesaver for Nepal. According to Sputnik News, Russia-US has agreed to extend New START treaty on Moscow's condition. The Sydney Morning Herald writes that Australia will not back down on its values in response to trade threats from China. And a quick look at the headlines once again. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi to address World Economic Forum's Davos dialogue virtually on Thursday. Nepal, Bangladesh and Myanmar launch COVID-19 vaccination drive with India-made vaccines. IMF projects 11.5% growth rate for India in 2021. India and US national security advisors hold telephonic conversation, agree to work closely to further advance India-US relation. US asks its citizens to reconsider travelling to Pakistan due to COVID-19, terrorism and violence. And Cricket Australia confirms members of the Indian cricket team were subjected to racial abuse. India is celebrating the 151st birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi. Before we end, let us listen to his favourite bhajan, Vaishnava Jan, by artists from Myanmar. And with that, we end this bulletin. See you at the same time tomorrow with the next edition of the World News.